Hi and welcome to Let's Talk, all about books, social media and good things to do around Auckland. Carole Beu will review her book of the week from the Women's Bookshop, and I'll talk about my word of the week, which is emoticon. Actually, the word of the year ought to be cupcake because those sweet little morsels are everywhere. Coming up in a few minutes is Miss Melicious, an author who knows cupcakes inside out. But first, in our segment about what's on around town, let's get into the Heritage Festival starting this weekend. Now, some of you might say, what heritage? Because on the surface, this town can seem a little light on history. Absolutely not so, says our first guest, Edward Bennett. Hi, Edward. Thanks for being on Let's Talk. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, heritage. We do get this impression, don't we, that there's kind of not much history in Auckland?
That's right. It's amazing the number of people you talk to, even tourism people, and they say, "Oh, no, there's no heritage. If you want heritage in New Zealand, you'd have to go to Napier or Dunedin." And it's amazing what we have right here.
So, what do you do to tell people about history then?
Well, I take walks on Karangahape Road and Ponsonby Road for the business associations of those two areas. Each walk is about 2 hours long. They're free. They're provided by the business associations. We're really lucky, both on Ponsonby Road and K Road, we have a really good selection of different types of buildings, different styles, different periods, and with a lot of interesting stories attached to some of them too.
Yes, it's the stories that go with the buildings, isn't it?
Yes.
Is what makes heritage come alive.
Yes.
And here we are with Heritage Festival starting, which actually hasn't had very much publicity, has it? I guarantee if you talk to the average Aucklander, they wouldn't have a clue that the Heritage Festival was just about to get underway.
Well,
there are so many fabulous things to do, aren't there, in the next 2 weeks?
Well, again, that's part of the mindset amongst a number of people. They don't see heritage as being particularly important. And so whilst the council promotes things like Lantern Festival and Pacifica as living, breathing manifestations of living culture, they don't quite push heritage as much. I mean, they do a lot, but not nearly as much as we'd like.
But the places that our ancestors have lived in, I mean, it is flesh and blood, isn't it? I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those people who came and lived here and built those buildings and lived the lives that they did.
That's
So,
right,
yes.
and people really do love the look of some buildings, and they're highly intrigued by some of the stories, and some of the stories are not particularly extraordinary, but they are very captivating.
And you've got some captivating titles on some of the things that you're doing during the festival. I like, for instance, Opium and Optimism, the Myers Park Tour.
That's
So
right.
explain a little, yes.
Well, Grey Street, as it was, which is now Gray's Avenue, had a number of opium dens. Probably not that many, but there were a number of Chinese establishments there, and a number of people dealt in opium. As it happened, the police didn't need a search warrant to search Chinese premises. So whenever there was a drug raid, it would always be a Chinese person, not a European.
And I suppose the fine upstanding citizens who went to church every week were probably hugely disapproving of the opium dens in their midst.
Well, that's right, and it's the thing. They got the impression that any Chinese establishment and any Chinese person obviously had some connection with opium. So Gray's Avenue had quite a bad reputation, and that was one of the reasons why Arthur Myers donated £10,000 to the City of Auckland to create Myers Park. And the New Zealand government bought up quite a bit of Gray's Avenue and created the state housing, which many people remark about some of our best bits of modernist architecture in the country, actually.
Wow. And then let's move on to heroism, tragedy and heritage roses, all about the Simon Street Cemetery.
Yes, well, the Simon Street Cemetery has the graves of quite a number of our most important early settlers, including Governor Hobson, the only 19th century governor to be buried in this country, and quite a number of people that everyone's aware of their name, like Thomas Henderson.
No, I'm not aware of his name.
Well,
Sorry.
Thomas Henderson had a mill out in
Yes.
West Auckland,
Oh, right. Which is
around
called?
which
Yes.
the town of
Yes.
Henderson developed.
Right,
So
yes.
it's as simple as that. And
Yeah.
he's buried in the Simon Street Cemetery. And there are interesting tales of heroism and tragedy. And cemeteries worldwide tend to be repositories of flora and fauna. Like there are all sorts of animals and plants hiding undisturbed in Victorian cemeteries, and that's what we have in the Simon Street Cemetery.
So people might have planted an old-fashioned rose or something that might still exist there. Yes.
That's right. And there's several dozen of them. You might know the Nancy Steen Rose Garden at Parnell. Well, she got a number of the roses for that heritage collection from the Simon Street Cemetery.
Wow. People are scared of going into the Simon Street Cemetery, though, aren't they? They think it's full of drunkards and layabouts and people who might be mean to them. So,
well, that's equally true and untrue. By and large, we find that the drunkards and layabouts actually just keep pretty much to themselves. Yes. It does tend to look a bit more threatening than it is. Unfortunately, it's been allowed to get rather overgrown, which is also a problem because the trees have been allowed to grow up. They're actually shading out a lot of what had been meadowland. And so we're losing a lot of the Victorian funeral flowers because, of course, they can't grow in the shade. Right.
Speaking of Simon Street, you talk also about the greatest bridge in the world, by which I presume you mean the Grafton Road Bridge?
Yeah, yes. Grafton Bridge, yes. Yeah. When it opened in 1910, for about 6 months, it was the biggest single-spanned arch bridge in the world.
Well, who would have known? Yes.
Yes. Yeah, until another one was opened in New York at the end of 1910. But, it definitely was at the time. They were very, very proud of the fact. Auckland only had a population of about 60,000. So it was regarded as a monumental waste of ratepayers' money.
It's like all these things always are.
The city would never get large enough to warrant the cost.
Oh, yes. And now look.
And now look, yes,
how we wish it had been built as a sort of a 6-lane highway. It would have been good, wouldn't it? Instead of that narrow thing that's now confined to buses during the day, isn't it?
Well, admittedly, that's a double-edged sword, because if they had built it wider, Grafton wouldn't be there.
Yeah, and all those lovely old houses on the ridge.
That's right. So, it's an ill wind that blows no one any good.
Speaking of lovely old houses, we really do have some amazing old wooden houses, don't we, in that K Road, Ponsonby, Greylin, Grafton sort of area. It's amazing how many still exist.
That's right, and in fact, apparently, Greylin, the 900 acres of Greylin, which a lot of people are familiar with, most of the houses were built between the 1880s and the First World War, and they're all fairly intact. So apparently it's the largest concentration of wooden Victorian houses in the world. Other cities, like San Francisco, a lot of the houses have been replaced by apartment blocks. So Greylin is unique, apparently.
Yeah, and of course they do have so much charm, and which is why even ones in pretty bad condition are worth $1 million today, aren't they, in those areas?
Yes, but it's amazing how that's changed. I mean, in the early 70s, you virtually couldn't give them away.
Give them away, yes, because it was a grotty part of town then,
that's
wasn't it?
Right.
Yes, before it became gentrified.
Full of the wrong sort of people.
Yes.
That's right. I remember my father was a house builder, and he built very good conservative houses in the 40s, 50s. Yes. And, every time he looked at something like a Victorian house, he'd just say, just throw a match in it.
Yes, and now we have absolute outrage if anybody dares to change one, or even worse, wants to take one off the site. It causes much community unease, doesn't it?
Well, it's a change in texture. Victorian houses are really, really attractive, and if they were being replaced by good architecture, it probably wouldn't be that much of a problem. But unfortunately, I'm afraid a lot of architecture, especially developments of houses, are pretty crap.
Yes, well, lots of discussion on that, isn't there? And there's another talk you're going to do in the festival, which is Fire, Flames and Passion, the Red Light District. We don't imagine that we had a red light district, really, do we? Unless somebody fills us in on all the wonderful details.
Well, the red light district used to be down on the waterfront. And in fact, it was destroyed.
It is all over again, really, isn't it?
Well, yes, but where the downtown shopping centre is, that had been the traditional red light district, and it was basically systematically destroyed by Auckland City Council and the Harbour Board, and they created the downtown shopping centre. That's when the red light district tended to move to K Road. That was in the 1960s, and it alighted at the far end of K Road, just where it joins Ponsonby Road. And that end had a disastrous fire in the 1880s. An entire block had gone up in November of 1885 and was rebuilt. It actually changed the planning regulations for Auckland City Council, so that from that point on you were no longer allowed to build wooden shops. So the far end of the street, that's why it's called Fire, Flames and Passion, because we have the Great Fire of K Road, and then the Red Light District, Ironically, a number of the red light industries, the adult shops and the strip clubs that existed there, they didn't alter their buildings very much. A lot of legitimate businesses, they will tend to rip out their interiors every decade or so.
Yes. Mm.
And so there's nothing left of the original Victorian interiors. The adult industry doesn't tend to spend a lot of money. So
And it likes to have its little back rooms.
that's right. And, so, and they, in fact, just recently a building was redone as an art gallery, a dealer gallery at that end. And they uncovered the most magnificent carved staircase and fireplaces,
Wow, yes.
which had just been boarded in.
And there were people with the most amazing names running those establishments, weren't there? I did a bit of research recently and came across Black Julia and Madame Blanc, and the madams who ran these houses were great characters in Victorian society, weren't they?
Yes, but the Victorian madams, they were down round about the town hall.
Right, yeah.
During that period, K Road was utterly respectable.
It's amazing how things change.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Edward. Well, lots of people, I'm sure, will enjoy your festival offerings.
Jolly good.
You know emoticons, those little symbols we're always adding to email and messages to indicate the mood of our messages. The classic is the smiley face composed of a colon, a hyphen and a bracket. So useful for those times when you're making a joke and want to make sure the receiver of your message does actually realise it's a joke. This week it's happy birthday to the emoticon, which is amazingly 30 years old. It was invented by a guy called Scott Fahlman. He's a university professor now, but back in 1982 he was just one of a bunch of geeks who were already using the web before the rest of us had even heard of it. Some physics boys were kidding around with a joke about the slippery nature of mercury, and one of them, obviously a serious sort of lad, thought it was for real. "What we need," wrote one of them, "is a symbol we can use to give a hint that we're just horsing around." Hence the sideways smiling thing, followed soon afterwards by all manner of variations. Of course, smartphones now come loaded with emoticon pictures, so users no longer have to laboriously finger tap speech marks to convey how they're feeling. I sometimes wonder why we're using words at all. Cupcakes. For some reason, this is a time when a bite-sized cake with a cherry on top is all anyone needs for a fab sugar hit. We're creating and consuming them like never before. The local go-to girl for cupcake intelligence is Miss Malicious, whose new book is packed with all anyone could ever want to know about baking and decorating this year's favourite sweet treat. Miss Malicious, it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I think we must look like a bit of an odd twosome, me being Miss Prim in my sort of businessy type jacket, and you in all your gorgeousness.
Oh, wow.
Which is
Thank you.
perfect to go with the gorgeousness of your pink book with packed full of all sorts of lovely pictures of cupcakes. Because cupcakes are your thing.
They are, yep.
Now, tell me, I gather you have a shop. Tell me about the shop.
We do. We have a store in Te Atatū Peninsula on Gunner Drive. It's a tea shop and cupcake shop. So it's definitely a nice place to come to, have a nice cup of tea and a cupcake.
This sounds like the sort of job you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning for.
No, I don't actually. We open at 11 every day. So I usually drop off my children and then head on down to the store and start baking. It only takes me a couple of hours and I can get out hundreds of cupcakes in that time.
So is there nothing in your shop but rows and rows and rows of highly colourful cupcakes?
That's right.
So who comes in to buy them?
Everybody. We have, we've got little kids obviously with their parents. We have local elderly ladies that come down, have cups of tea and cupcakes in the sort of morning time. We get giant rugby guys coming in the weekend.
Big guys in high-vis jackets and things too, getting off at work time.
Police officers that come down, we pretty much anybody. We have people that come from Karaka, we have people that come from Pukekohe, all the way out in Whangarei. They pretty much drive down weekly. So.
What is it about cupcakes? There's this craze for cupcakes at the moment, isn't there?
It's just a nice, people like cake, but cake often is, you know, you have to make a giant cake just to have a slice, and it's not as pretty, you can't carry it around. I think cupcakes are just a small morsel. You don't feel as bad about indulging, but they look cute, they look, you know, fantastic and pretty, and people just love them.
So tell me about the incarnation of the book. How did that get born?
We actually had Penguin come in and see me one day, and yeah, just pretty much grew from there.
Said, let's do a cupcake book.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, it seems to me there's a sort of a riff of nostalgia that runs through the whole cupcake industry as well. It's like going back to the 3-tiered cake stand era when, you know, when silver tongs, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is that right, or is there a
yes and
new
no.
modern edge to it now?
I mean, we as a business with Miss Malicious do have a bit more of a twist on it. I mean, we've got 250 flavours. It's not just your general butterfly cake that would often get whipped up. But there is definitely a nostalgia there. New Zealanders especially love things all home baking. Cupcakes originated with, they were called a cupcake because all the ingredients were made, you know, a cup of milk, a cup of sugar, a cup of flour.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with the cup that it sits in?
And that was the other reason also, they'd actually put the leftover cake batter into just actual teacups and put them into the oven to bake.
Oh, really?
So that's where it sort of started from, and obviously we've come into these things where you can buy these amazing coloured papers and wraps and all sorts of interesting accessories to go with them.
So is there a flavour of cupcake that you could generally say is tops? I mean, like chocolate or lemon or
To be
whatever,
honest, every single person I know always goes on about the red velvet cupcake.
Yes.
I don't think many of them have actually tried it. I think it's something that they see on TV and say, oh, that looks delicious, I want to try it. That seems like something, you know, that I want. And we get people that come and saying, do you have red velvet today?
I had never heard of red velvet cake until a few years ago, and I did a bit of research, and I see it's an American idea.
It's very
so
American.
it's this deep scarlet coloured cake. I mean, it's outrageous, isn't it?
Well, it started off, a red velvet cake is actually an original cupcake from America, like you said, and it's made with a cocoa. The type of cocoa actually turns the cake red.
Oh, really?
So unfortunately we don't have that cocoa here, so when everyone wants a red velvet cupcake, they're getting a food dye, you know, food colouring cupcake, so it doesn't have that same, you know, really rich southern taste to it. It's a really light chocolate cake made with buttermilk. It is delicious, and I think most people, to be honest, actually just want the cream cheese frosting more than the actual cake itself. But yeah, that's definitely something we get asked for a lot.
Judging by the colourful photographs in the book, you must go through a bucket load of food colourings every day.
Yes and no. Like we do obviously, you know, use food colouring in some of the things, but we do also try and keep to flavouring things with fruits and juices and things as well. So it's not always crazy, and we get a lot of people that don't want their E numbers, you know. So
how do you mean by E numbers?
E numbers are all the little what they actually make the food colouring out of, so it's not as natural. So we, you know,
yes,
vegan
there are people who read those
yeah.
tiny numbers on the back of packets and things, aren't there? Yes. And how about the gluten-free department? Do you have to abide by that as well?
We do have people that want gluten-free cupcakes. It's sort of few and far between. You know, might get a day when everybody comes in, and then you'll get a week where nobody comes in. So it's a bit hard to kind of gauge and measure. Yeah. So we're sort of working on doing a bit more of that, I think.
So you have the one cupcake store in Te Atatu, but do you have plans for world domination?
We do, of course. Why not? Yeah, we do. We're about to open up a second shop, which is, we're sort of changing things around at the moment, but we are looking at doing that very soon. And we're also looking at doing some more wholesale. We actually sell our cupcakes on K Road at the Hard Luck Cafe. And we'll be doing a lot more of that around Auckland as well.
Now, I gather you've got 3 daughters.
I do, yeah.
And so they're perfect trialists for your recipes. Well, but it must be hard to restrict them, to say, no, darling, you've had your sugar hit for today.
No, it's not difficult at all. It's no, you're not having one, you're going to go nuts, basically. They want them daily, and they know that they're not allowed to, otherwise it's just too much sugar. Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't mind, obviously, you know, cupcakes are definitely an indulgence, and it's something that it's, you want to have. I mean, no problem having them weekly, but sort of every day is really not.
Yes. And I see in this book too that there's some really, really grown-up cakes too. Like there's a margarita cake there. Yeah. So you've got alcoholic cupcake, which
we are an
adult
cupcakery, so you know we have to sort of push that out there to people. We do cater for an adult palate over a child's palate. So.
But if you make a margarita cupcake, the process of baking would remove the alcohol content, would it not, or does it not?
It does a little bit. Obviously, the flavour still lingers in the actual cake, but in the frosting, we actually put alcohol directly into that. So then there's still the alcohol through there. Yes. But there is obviously they're not really cooked long enough, so you still get quite an alcoholic taste through them. Yeah,
to be a bit careful eating some of your cakes.
Yeah.
And do brides go for this sort of thing too? Instead of a traditional big cake, just have a whole lot of little cupcakes?
Yeah, we do. We often do the little top tier with the cake, and then the cupcakes underneath. Sometimes we just did one on the weekend where it was whoopie pies and cupcakes and cake, so it's sort of a best of every world, really. Yeah.
What's a whoopie pie?
A whoopie pie is American again, and basically it's cake batter which has been spooned onto a cookie tray and baked like a cookie and then put together with the ganache in the middle.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
they're delicious.
So how much experience did you have when you decided I'm going to be a cupcake store owner? Did you,
I've
apart
been
from
in
home
I've been
baking?
in retail since I just turned 13, so I've got that side of it for a really long time, and I've done styling and things, so that's kind of where that sort of whole side came in. But with the baking, I mean, I've just been baking since I was little, and I mean, how much experience do you need if you're good at it?
And it's
do
just
it.
a matter really of following or creating a recipe that gets followed to the letter, presumably, so that you don't have any mistakes or...
See, I'm a funny one. I'm kind of I'll just throw that in, and I can do it by sight, taste, smell even. So I actually found it quite difficult during, putting recipes together that other people, and we sort of tested to make sure that no matter who did it, they'd come out exactly the same.
And one last question, can you ever bear to eat a cupcake yourself when you're making and selling
I eat
hundreds of them every
all
day?
the time. Hello, look at me. I eat them all the time. I love them. And we'll get customers coming in and going, oh, surprising that you're sort of eating a cupcake. And I'm like, well, you have to test the product.
To test your own product, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Missy. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know about you, but I've just about had it with the keep calm and carry on advice. When the wartime message was first resurrected, we all liked its nostalgic appeal. But now, after being printed on 1 million t-shirts, tea towels and coffee mugs, reworked in newspaper headlines and used for TV shows, it's wearing pretty thin. I was intrigued, though, to learn its history and rediscovery in an obscure English bookshop called Barter Books. Here's the full and little-known story, as seen on YouTube.
In the spring of 1939, during the build-up to war with Germany, the British government commissioned a series of propaganda posters. These posters were intended to offer the public reassurance in the dark days that lay ahead. They were required to be uniform in style and were to feature a special and handsome typeface, making them difficult for the enemy to counterfeit. They used the crown of King George VI as the only graphic device and had just 2 colours. Of the 3 final designs that went into production, the first poster carried the slogan, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." The second poster had the words, "Freedom is in peril, defend it with all your might." But the third design, of which over 2.5 million posters were printed, simply read, "Keep calm and carry on." The first 2 designs were distributed in September of 1939 and appeared up and down the country in shop windows and railway platforms. But the Keep Calm posters were held in reserve, intended for use only in times of crisis or invasion. In the end, the poster was never officially issued, and it remained unseen by the public until a copy turned up more than 50 years later. It was found in a second-hand bookshop called Barter Books in the northeast corner of England. Barter Books was begun in 1991 by a couple, Stuart and Mary Manley. The building used to be an old Victorian railway station. Huge rows of stacked shelves now stand in the place where the tracks would have been, but the station's old tea rooms and waiting rooms are still there. It was in 2000 that Stuart found the poster in a box of dusty old books that had been bought at auction. Mary liked it so much she had it framed and put it up near the shop till, and it proved so popular with the customers that a year later they began to sell copies. Since that time, the poster has been reproduced, parodied and trivialised, and has become a truly iconic image of the 21st century. It is hard to say exactly why such a phrase from a bygone decade would have so much appeal and resonance now. Its design is considered simple and timeless, and now commonly recognisable. However, it is perhaps the words on the poster that people find most enchanting. Like a voice out of history, it offers a very simple, warm-hearted message to inspire confidence in others during difficult times, and is something that should never fade from fashion. To keep calm and carry on.
And welcome Carole Beu from the Women's Bookshop with a book for this week, which is so new that you don't even have a proper copy of it. This is just a reader's copy, isn't it?
It's a manuscript in advance that they
Yeah.
sent me to read. The book will be hitting the shops any day now. It's Charlotte Grimshaw's new novel, Soon. It's just simply called Soon. It is extraordinary. We are actually launching it in the Women's Bookshop next Wednesday. That's the 3rd of October. Yes, 3rd of October at 6 o'clock in the Women's Bookshop. There is a Labour MP coming to the launch that I know of. As far as I know, there are no National Party MPs coming to the launch. And that's probably just as well.
Is that a telling observation
Yes,
in terms of
it
the book?
is.
Yes.
This is the most extraordinary political satire. I mean, Charlotte Grimshaw is an award-winning writer, and she is incredibly clever. She absolutely satirises completely and utterly, quite savagely at times, the current right-wing government, which remains nameless in the book, of course. One of the main characters is a Prime Minister called David, who has a mild speech impediment. He also has a limp, so he couldn't possibly be the person who is the current Prime Minister of New Zealand at all, could he?
No.
It's summer, holiday time, New Zealand beach. There is the Prime Minister's mansion just north of Auckland on a beachfront, beautiful beach, Pahutakawa trees. She evokes the New Zealand summer and the heat and the swimming. And this wonderful, luxurious lifestyle where they're still running the country but are basically on holiday.
Yeah.
So they're not allowed to discuss politics around the dinner table, for example, but the Prime Minister has to keep going off and taking phone calls and things. The Deputy Prime Minister is also there. He is simply called the Cock.
Yes.
The wives are there. Oh, also the Minister of Police is there. And one or two other friends of the family and so on. There are all sorts of family entanglements, particularly involving an adopted daughter, and the birth parents are there. Are the Prime Minister? No, the birth parents are the Prime Minister's wife, and the adoptive parents are there as guests as well. And this is Dr. Simon Lampton and his wife Karen, who are the adoptive parents of the teenage young woman, well, she's now 17 or 18, who is actually the birth daughter of the Prime Minister's wife. So there's very complicated
to add a whole lot of personal entanglement.
Entanglement. There are also sinister goings on in people's backgrounds. Now you have these men ogling the designer wives. You have the designer wives ogling the staff. And the staff are personal trainers and tennis coaches and waiters and all these beautiful young men who are gorgeous looking and have wonderful pecs and wear very tight t-shirts to show them off. And some of them, one suspects, are actually gay. The whole thing is a complete and utter satire and looks particularly quite seriously at the increasing gap between rich and poor, and their complete and utter lack of understanding of it.
This could like you say, it's New Zealand now, but it could actually be about almost any government in the Western world at the moment, couldn't it? I mean,
yes.
Every country is struggling with this stuff, and power has its way of inflating egos, no matter what side of the fence people are from.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, it could also be the Muldoon government in New Zealand, but it is set in the present time.
You can tell it's now.
Absolutely set in the present time. Digging up sleazy backgrounds, and the police get involved. It looks at manipulation of people and it looks at corruption. And there's a very telling sequence about, there's one daughter, Simon Lampton's daughter, one of his daughters, Claire, can't stand the whole pseudo thing, and so she refuses to be there, and she's back at home in Auckland. And both she and Simon's brother are quite left-wing and very critical of this particular group of people. And Simon says something along the lines of, that they're actually naive, because his daughter Claire and his brother Ford, because he thinks that they believe that when people actually understand the growing gap between the rich and the poor, that they will actually be good and do something about it. He says they're naive. They don't realise that, in fact, it's in the interests of the wealthy to get wealthier. It's in the interests of the wealthy to let the poor get poorer. And once they understand it, they're not going to do anything about it. In fact, they might attempt to make it worse. So it's very cynical.
Sounds like a riveting read. Soon by Charlotte Grimshaw. Thank you, Carole Beu.
Brilliant.
Thanks for watching Let's Talk. Next week we're meeting photographer Ross Land to hear how he took portraits of fascinating people for a beautiful new book, Made in New Zealand.